Good evening and welcome to the October 21st meeting of the Community Budget Advisory Committee. We will start with the approval of the agenda. Do I hear a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Been moved and seconded that the agenda be approved. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll come to a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, the motion carries. Next up is the approval of the minutes. Do I hear a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Second.
Been moved and seconded that the minutes are approved. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll come to a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, the motion carries. Next up is item 4.1, information and updates. Kari Carlson.
Good evening, committee members. This evening, I don't have a presentation. I'll just mention that in the agenda materials, there is a memo with some information and updates. It includes the May 2020 survey results that were taken in May for Creekside Community Center and Motor Vehicle Office. And then there is a memo from the Parks and Recreation Director, Ann Catry, in regards to proposed 2021 Parks and Recreation fees, and as well as some staffing information clarification. So if there's any questions, I would be happy to answer them, but I don't have any slides prepared.
So anybody got any questions on that? That would probably be it on 4.1, then we'll go on to 4.2. Is someone going to be presenting on 4.2?
Okay. Mr. Co-Chair and members, the summary report from the engagement sessions last week is at your place. And I know we didn't give you a whole lot of time when we got it out for you to take a look at it. So we had really strong attendance on Thursday night, 46 participants. And on Saturday morning, we had 15 participants. That's not including staff or committee members. The 46 is the most that we've had for any of the engagement sessions during the course of this process. And I think during the time of the session that most of those 46 were clearly engaged, either by putting questions into the chat or chiming in, so that, there were a few that were just there to listen and to observe, but we had good participation from the ones who were attending. And I think if there's a common theme that occurred through the two sessions, it was a support for the services that are provided. That was pretty clear. And I'd say that there was probably a split of opinion in terms of what would be the preferable option for various reasons. But I'd say it's pretty reflective of the conversation that we've had in this room. And so the reaction from the community members was about what you'd expect. There are some who are not wanting to see service reductions and felt that some reductions and some tax levy increase was appropriate. And then there were others who were on the side of saying that, in this current economic environment, that 0% tax levy approach was the most appropriate one. And I thought the reasons and rationale were well articulated by the members. They had good questions, and their input, I thought, reflected a genuine intent on the part of the participants to provide constructive feedback. I think they were there to learn, and they were there because they were, they're concerned, and I thought that their input reflected that. Mr. Chair, did you want to provide any insight, since you were both the presenter and trying to keep the trains running on time, you had a lot of responsibility. So I don't know how much you interpreted in terms of the feedback that was received and how you want to characterize it.
No, I think I'll agree with what Jamie had to say. I thought that there was a range of feedback that I think definitely we're meeting our engagement goal because we got a bunch of people to come and we got really good feedback from folks. And I do want to kind of reflect that it had a serious nature to it, so people took it seriously, which I thought was a good thing. Sometimes you worry when this sort of meeting happens that who knows who's going to come and say what, but and there was a range of people. There were people who were services focused that wanted to hear various messages around services that they valued. And then on the kind of revenue side, there was a range of folks between people who said, you should go with the 5% number and raise the tax levy and let's keep the services. And there were people who were emphatic that they felt we had room to do the 0% one. And I wouldn't say that there was any particularly heavy kind of weight in any particular direction on that. And I also think if you look at the feedback that we got on the Let's Talk Bloomington, that kind of range of opinions about the revenue side is reflected there. I think there's that if you look at people's kind of preferred kind of levy approach, there was what we would call in the data business a bimodal distribution, where there was one set of folks on one end and one set of folks on the other end, and it was about the same on both sides. And so I think it was a useful exercise to see if there was something that we were missing with respect to our process. And I didn't come away with the feeling that there was any super big kind of gotcha in what we had put together. I think that people felt what we had put together was a thoughtful set of priorities that at least based on the input seems aligned kind of at the big picture level with what the community values. So Jamie, that's how I would characterize it.
Yeah.
I know that there were a couple other committee members who were at some of the sessions. I don't know if the folks who were there watching would like to comment on what they saw. I'm trying to remember. Maureen, you were there, weren't you, Maureen?
Yes, I was able to attend and listen to both sessions, and I want to compliment you, Mr. Chair. That it was not without some interesting discussion and questions. So I compliment you on how you navigated through that. I think one observation, this is a very complicated issue. And for the general, resident of Bloomington to really grasp in that amount of time, actually, I was very impressed with the people who did attend. I was actually more surprised. I was expecting people to be more around that 0 to 3% and not even coming close to the 5%. And Thursday night, there seemed to be a lot of conversation with being okay with that 5% as long as police, law enforcement, and some other city services, they were willing to pay so those services wouldn't get cut. I guess the one thing, my only other comment, I do have to express my, I was very, I was surprised that there wasn't any businesses that attended, since CI and the property tax for commercial industrial carries a fair amount here in the city of Bloomington. There was no representation from the business community at all, and I think this has some major ramifications for business. So I was disappointed to see that there weren't any businesses that were interested to engage in this discussion. So those were my observations and comments, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And anybody else have comments? Okay. Anything else from the staff on that? Seeing head shakes up there. Okay. So that's the 4.2 item, community listening sessions and survey report. We should have really had listed in the agenda the 4.3 item, which is the kind of remaining conversation about the items on the list, because that's really, in many respects, the kind of remaining item that's on our agenda. So just to frame it up from a process perspective, we're pretty much at the point where we've received all the community input that we're going to receive and be able to consider prior to making a decision. We have this meeting and a meeting next week scheduled to have conversations around setting the final list of priorities that we're going to send to the city council. And we have told the city council that we are going to deliver those at the meeting in early November. So I think that from next steps for the committee, I think kind of going back to the list again, and we started having some conversations about moving things around, and then we decided that we were going to take it to the community to have a conversation. I think it's really time for us to kind of loop back and have that more detailed conversation about kind of priorities in there and see if there's things that we want to move either based on ideas that we had prior to going out for community feedback, or based on things that folks either heard, people who attended the sessions, or read in the transcripts that we had on that. And I think our goal is either tonight or next week is to come to a list that's edited to where we want it to be, where the two chairs can head off to the city council meeting and represent the work of the committee at the city council meeting. So that's what I think for the remaining work of the committee. I think that's really it, is just to kind of get down to brass tacks and get that done. So,
Mr. Chair, can I jump in?
Go ahead.
I apologize. I did have something else to add, and it wasn't specific to the engagement sessions. That we had mentioned earlier in the process that we also had the annual resident survey was out in the field, and we anticipated getting results back before the end of this process. And we do have the draft report. I'm hoping to have the final reports by the end of this week to share with the council, because we're going to present those to the council on November 9th. But there were a couple items in there that I did want to particularly highlight for you. And then, if I'm able to get the reports finalized and to you before next week meeting, I'm going to try to do that. The most important question, I think, that relates to the work that the committee has been doing is we've asked a question about the value of services for the taxes paid in Bloomington every year, going back to 2012 when we started doing the annual survey. And this year, the response to that was 70% said good or excellent when asked about the value of the city services in light of the taxes that they pay to the city of Bloomington. And that's up 7 points from last year. 2018 and 2019 were the low points in the community's opinion on that question at 63%. So we've come back up to 70%. This survey is also a national survey, so there are communities across the country that use the same survey language, so we have national benchmarks. And that comparison to the benchmark around the country, that 70% is higher than the other communities. So, in terms of what that opinion is about where taxes stand in the community, I think this gives you a pretty good feel that 7 out of 10 people feel pretty strongly about the value that they're getting here. I want to make sure that you had that little piece of information, and then hopefully I'll have the survey results tallied so you can see them before your final meeting too.
Okay, any questions for Jamie on that? Okay, so I'm gonna propose again that we use the process that I described last time. We're gonna go around the room, and folks will have the opportunity each to kind of propose a change to the item here. And then we'll have a conversation about that and make a decision about each one as we go. And we'll just continue doing that until we run out of things that we want to talk about. So do folks want me to go in more detail? In the last meeting, I described it in a little bit more detail process-wise, but that would be what I would propose that we would do. if you want to propose something that swaps two things, feel free to do that. If you want to say, I just want to move this from here to here and everything else kind of moves down, I think that's fine too. And it was easier to talk about. Hey, John, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think we will probably run into the same challenge with the process as I sensed that we were running into last week. So I wanted to throw out a few observations that I got from reading the materials and wonder if we might just try to establish whether there's a consensus on them, or whether I get it wrong. So I was sort of thinking about the materials, not having been at the two sessions, and what I got was there was a lot of strong feedback supporting police, and nearly as strong a feedback supporting fire. And my sense would be there'd be genuine, of this group, at least based on what was presented, there would be genuine concern about cuts in those areas. And I sensed quite a bit of support for the city doing what it can do, perhaps at the level it's been doing it roughly, for nurturing the cultural arts, not necessarily huge direct subsidies, but I think people were saying that, but at least creating that environment where the cultural arts organizations, can survive, thrive, exist, fill in the blank, that those were a couple of themes. And another theme, but I picked up and it registered with me that there was not a great understanding of levy setting and how it relates directly or less directly to actual tax obligations of an individual. And I shared the observation that there seemed to be a fair amount of support at that 5% level when considering it in the context of things that might get cut. But I was intrigued that there was that support at the same time that I sensed that people thought that meant their taxes might go up 5%. And what does that lead us to in terms of decision making? I don't know. I think that's a council decision, but it leads me to think that there's an overall benefit to derive from trying to increase the public's understanding of the difference between a tax bill and a tax levy or overall size of the budget that's set. And I did not sense a whole lot of negative reaction to the general recommendations that were being made, other than protect our police, fire, and arts support. So I'm just wondering, did others, big strokes, sort of sense the same reaction?
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, John.
I too have kind of the same reaction, and given tonight's charge to us, I would look at it more like tinkering. I don't have anything 5, 3, or 0% that is going to change my mind, and I certainly didn't from the listening sessions. I didn't get anything from them that says, no, you're way off base. I think we're in the ballpark, and to kind of emphasize my position ahead of time, I'm not going to ask for any changes. To me, it'd be tinkering, because I don't have any big thoughts one way or another. So your idea of looking for a consensus, I think, is a good idea, because I think at the end of the night, we move one or two things, every one of us move one or two things, we end up in pretty much the same place. So I don't see it as a big advantage one way or the other. That's my perspective.
So John, one of the things I want to do, John over there, John Gibbs, is I want to show you quickly what I showed in the meeting on the tax question. And because, I have a decade and a half of experience of trying to, and failing to explain the Minnesota property tax system to people. And If Chris, if you could slide that out of the way there just a little bit, so that shows up a little bit better. I don't know if you control that or if. Oh,
People's pictures? No, that's not me. Can-
okay. There we go. Now it is moved. Is when I talked about kind of the property tax scenarios, I tried to frame it up in terms of the kind of median valued home and kind of the dollar amount sort of thing, because I think that provides a much stronger frame for people to kind of think about what that represents with respect to their taxes. And then just to kind of give you a sense, when we looked at scenarios here, this is what one of the scenarios would look like in the presentation. So we had the tax amount up there, we had the 5%, and then we showed the dollar amounts and the kind of concrete impacts that I went through and summarized out of what we had done. And that's how I tried to address that. I think, we've kind of mixed the apartment in here because we have more apartment dwellers in the city than we had when I was on the council, which I think is a good change in this particular conversation. But once you get off that kind of median valued average apartment concept and start talking about people's individual bills,
Right.
and the ability to get the property tax refund and the deferral that's available to seniors, and there's a whole lot of stuff that's very specific to people's situations that resists generalization in these conversations. And so looking at this and saying, that some people pay higher, some people less, but at this 5% scenario, it's $3.50 roughly per month. And that's how I tended to frame it. So. And on your concept there, I think your point about looking for themes is in general the right thing to be looking at and kind of to start driving the conversation. The one thing that I think about is if in this context, if there's nothing in the police department and fire department that's discretionary, that every single thing that they do is kind of at the very highest priority, it's very difficult to think about that and then think about in years when things are good, adding more resources to the police department. And what that does basically is your base of things that are absolutely in that kind of that first bucket just gets bigger and bigger as the percentage of your budget. And we did hear testimony from one person who felt, based on their experience, that there were things inside the police department that were opportunities to save there, and that based on their personal experience, they were. And it wasn't somebody who was opposed to the police department. It was just that they're in any organization that there's opportunities to save. And so, personally, I think we did a good job in the rankings that we did of kind of holding off on impacts for the police until the latter buckets, to the 3% and the 0% bucket. But like any organization, I have to believe that there's some opportunity to economize in that area without having an enormous impact on service delivery. So that's my kind of reading on the situation. Other comments? And I think kind of reacting to what John talked about kind of themes on this, I think that's a worthwhile thing to think about. And if folks have comments on that, I'd be interested in hearing. And Chris, if you notice that Akia is raising your hand, feel free to. Or Akia, if you just want to jump in when you feel like talking, you can just go ahead and do that. You don't have to raise your hand. Maureen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do agree with John about overall themes and kind of looking at that. And again, you've all heard my what I feel I think is important as far as city services, and that's public safety and it's public works. Those are the two big priorities. And then, along with John's comments about the arts, I was kind of taken aback because there were more public comments and people expressing their thoughts of wanting to retain the arts and culture programs here at the city. So I do kind of echo with I've kind of had a mind shift on the arts and culture. But one of my questions is we started looking at discussions where the county can step in and help, where we can, get more of efficiencies of service or scale, and Highland Greens and Bush Lake. Is there, since we're still early October and this will be settled by early December, is there any way that some of those possibilities could get finalized or confirmed, which would then be, then, we could look at other ways to make it up? I just think there's some opportunity there. And if there is, do we have time to have staff explore that to bring back some options?
So I think on that, I think the answer is probably no. And the reason is that if you look at the timeline when we're supposed to deliver our recommendations to the council, I don't believe that there's time to come to an agreement on something like that in that, because basically you're talking about getting something done in a week for the committee to be able to act. I do think, though, that if the staff were able to work something like that out, that could come to the city council, and the city council could make adjustments at their level. So I think when I say no, it's about no for us, but maybe for the city as a whole that could get done. But that would, that requires a negotiation, and we were pretty careful not to take on anything that had kind of negotiation risk in it as part of what we were putting together.
Thank you.
Yeah. Other comments or questions? Neil, you're always full of wisdom over there, and I'm gonna call on you because that's part of the burden of being the co-chair is you're gonna get called on.
Steve and I met with the council a week ago Monday and presented it. My reaction the next morning was, I'm not sure most of them heard us. They listened very politely, asked a couple of questions. The questions were not real targeted. The questions were rolling, difficult to answer. I walked away they're not there yet. And I think they need time to go through the process that we're going right now before they can come to a vote. And I think the sooner that we can present to them our list, if we have it now, then let's give it to them and let them deal with it. Because I walked away a little bit discouraged. They're not there. They've been allowed to not have to wrestle with it, and they need to, because they have to vote in about 3 weeks. So I think we've done a great job. We've given an awful lot of material, and they're the ones that have to digest it. They're not going to digest any more than what we've given them. They're going to be like a cow with 7 stomachs. They're going to take stuff from the last 3 or 4 stomachs will define what comes out. But they need to have time to do that. So that was my takeaway from the council. I'm not trying to be critical. I think it's an awful lot of stuff to digest.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot of stuff for us.
Other comments or observations?
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Jessica.
For me, I echo what they have been saying. Definitely, as you were saying too, that the police and the fire department, they could have supplies or something that could be adjusted as well. However, on all the talkings for the community, I see a lot of comments about the motor vehicle. So I think there are some that they are okay with that. And if we keep those services at this city, I think that will be okay. That's what I read through those papers. If we keep the basic services, it should be okay. So that's my reading on the motor vehicle at this point.
So just to be completely kind of clear on what you're saying, are you saying that you're okay with the motor vehicle where we've put it right now, or are you suggesting that you'd like to see it in a different priority?
A different place.
Different place,
Yes.
okay. I'll put that on the list. So far I have discussing a little bit more about motor vehicle. John brought up kind of arts-related items, and then I think, Maureen, based on your comment, I had kind of looking at kind of where we're at on the police and fire, just to make sure that we're comfortable with where things are at on that. Were there other things that, because what I'm trying to do is kind of build a little bit of a list here that we can kind of go walk them through. Anybody else have things that they think that they want to see on that list? Josh, I see you waving over there.
So, Mr. Chair, members here, when I read the comments and I went through each one of them, I heard.
Josh, can you use your microphone, please?
Sorry. So I read through all the comments, and I heard our senior citizens expressing some pretty serious concerns about divesting in Creekside. And I wonder if we need to put this into some more context. That there's public infrastructure that's deteriorating, that's going to cost a lot of money to fix it up. That has to be separated from investing in opportunities and support for people who need to have activities and access to social experiences and services and supports. So I'm wondering if there isn't some way to add some other commentary when we submit this list for consideration by the council. So we're not saying don't provide these services to folks who are in need. We're saying this is a way too expensive way to do it. There's got to be a better way to increase the quality of services over the long term. And then that leads to what is the public infrastructure investment by the city into a gathering place that is maybe more modern. It might cost more on the front end, but over time. Then that got me to thinking about all of the public infrastructure conversations that we've had, from our firehouses to our ice rinks to all that we didn't touch on here because it's a longer term. I do worry that if this downturn continues, we're going to be right back at this in a year or two, and we got to make sure that's front and center, that this is a short-term budget. There are some longer-term things that are critical for the quality of life here in town. So that jumped out at me. And I'm not sure if I'm explaining it exactly rightly, but I think the public infrastructure piece, which has been a theme that I've talked about, we need to message that to the council. And so I don't know, you got this bucket of things for the long term. And I would resubmit for consideration. Some communities are looking at naming rights campaigns or other revenue streams, which might be challenging in this market time, where we can raise revenues in a smart way to help fund some of these things for our senior citizens and youth. I'd like to see our city council spend a little more time studying some of that for the long term, so that we're just not kicking the can down. So I just submit that and would ask if we can maybe develop that list too.
So we had before, and so I'm just taking notes as you're talking here. We had kind of the parking lot items that we were going to send off to the council as part of the report. And what I took away from your conversation was that there was kind of public infrastructure investments, and then kind of looking at other revenue streams, like an example was naming rights.
Naming rights.
Yeah.
And this notion that the Creekside, if that goes away, what do we replace it with? So what does that look like?
Mm-hmm.
So I think if that ends up being closed, what's the city's plan for a longer-term strategy to make sure that those services continue, or something else is built at some point in the future? And how do you pay for that, and what's the strategy for it?
Mm-hmm. John?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Everything Josh is saying really resonates with me a lot, and it strikes me, some of its presentation and some of its the substance itself. And I was reflecting on that one slide that was put together before our last meeting that had those sort of parking lot items, but they weren't doable in this time frame, but well worth exploring was the recommendation. And my gut is, if we figured out how to make that slide, if not front and center, rather prominent in our messaging and in our presentation, yet added a bullet to it that might be more generic along the lines of other revenue generating opportunities. We won't use Jamie's other people's money thing exactly, because some of it might be our money, but other revenue generating opportunities as a bullet gets to a bunch of that. Mm-hmm. And then maybe the Creekside and seniors thing is really, just as Josh explained it, some narrative around that, because in fact, those issues are addressed in our list, but you'd almost have to be, and there's no offense here, you'd almost have to be a green eye shade accountant type to really pull them out and figure out what does that really mean. And so that part might truly be communication, I think. But does this make sense as a way to navigate? I think you're spot on, and especially as the council might get reaction to this.
So this is that slide from the previous meeting that I,
Yeah.
the October 7th meeting that I just grabbed out of there and put in a new spot.
Yeah. I mean, to me, that really raised a lot of important, just not immediate actionable. I mean, maybe they're all immediately actionable, but deliverable things that will be worth looking at. And it did come through in some of the comments here. People were intrigued by the notion of, are we maximizing, the opportunities at South Loop, the revenue and expenditure and allocation opportunities. Those questions did come up.
Yeah. So one thing I did talk about in one of them was, people were asking about the South Loop, and I did talk about, we had the South Loop in the parking lot as the top item on our list to talk about there. So I still think that that's a worthwhile thing to do. So maybe I'll rename this as recommended.
Yep.
Like recommended longer term actions. Are there other things that people think ought to go on this list here? I've been trying to jot notes down as we go along to make sure that I've got everything that folks came up with as we were talking about things here. Josh?
Mr. Chair, if I may indulge the committee again, I was struck, not surprised, but by the almost unanimous support for police and fire, which makes sense with what's happening in the country. I wonder, and this is more philosophical, are we asking our police department and our police officers to do too much in society in general? And are there things that Chief Potts and the team could do, reflect on over the next year or so, in which they stay focused like a laser beam on public safety, but if there's things that they're being asked to do that are outside of that mission, there's been mission creep, there's opportunities for savings or in other ways where that can be transferred to mental health. I just think about the number of police visits I've seen for mental health just in my neighborhood to a certain house over the last year, which is in the dozens. And the officers have handled that situation incredibly professionally. But boy, are we asking them to do a lot. And so I'm wondering if there's something there that they could be asked to think about for the longer term that could be a savings for the police department, but not jeopardize public safety in any way, shape, or form. It's a conversation that's happening all across Minnesota and the country. And we can, again, continue to be at the forefront and leaders in that. That doesn't make any rash decisions that undermine people's safety, doesn't devalue in any way, shape, or form what the men and women in Bloomington Police Force are doing, but really ask that longer-term question. So it's not really our charter to do that, but I wonder if that isn't something that gets teed up for future discussions and conversations with the cross sections of Bloomington. I just share that for consideration.
Okay, other items. I'm just thinking about how to frame this because I'm worried about having a recommendation come from the committee that's
For guidance.
Pardon me?
I defer to my colleague, the former chief, for some guidance on how to frame that up
Yeah.
in a way that is.
Yeah.
I will comment, if I may.
Oh, go ahead, John.
The profession that I started in 1968, personally, has changed tremendously. The things police have been asked to do have changed tremendously. But the training that the officers get is probably not, they don't get the social level worker training, but they get the social worker's intervention job. But it doesn't just say, okay, well, let's hand it to the social worker, let's hand it to the advocate, let's hand it to this or that other person. Because what happens when it goes south? Well, we'll just call the police. No, you send the police in the first place, and then they make referrals. It's a slippery slope, and there's no easy answer. I just know that over the years, police have been asked to do many things beyond law enforcement. And their preparation is a 4 to 8 hour block of training that other people spend 3 or 4 years learning about. I think they do an incredibly good job, but I think there's the human factor. You can only do so much. And you use every tool you got in the kit. But it's what we are asking of law enforcement is actually undoable in some cases. So they do the best job humanly possible. But the alternative, turning over to civilians, has some merit as long as things go well. Well, there's no guarantees. And quite often things don't go so well. Then you need the law enforcement side to kick in. So which is the right scenario? Send social workers? Some cities do it. This is not a new concept. Bloomington wouldn't be breaking ground. But it has its limits. There has to be more training and perception by dispatchers and people that receive calls so they ask the right questions so they can make the right determination. It's like they ask a lot of calls about fires. It determines how many trucks, what kind of trucks, and get there so the best possible service can be delivered. Same for police. There are specialties within the department. And if it gets to a certain level, you send a specialist. But they're not knee-deep in those things. I mean, the specialists are 2, 3, 4, 5 people maybe. And are they always working? No. So, I mean, I don't want to make this over-complicated, but it's a very difficult situation to handle. And I get to form opinions from the cheap seats now. And I think the police department is doing incredibly well trying to diversify, trying to give alternatives for officers so they interact more with the community. So it's not going into an unknown situation. It's going into a neighborhood or a group of homes or an apartment building that they are familiar with. Because it's not a job you can do alone. Police can't come in and be effective by themselves. They need help, and the help is the citizens. You don't develop that over a day or two. You develop that over a period of time by having the time to go and do things with the kids and the family, and have different programs from Citizens Academy to Coffee with a Cop to going to Galaxy after school programs to on and on and on. So it's a complicated issue, and I better stop before I continue to ramble on, but there's no easy answer, and I don't think there's a right answer, and there certainly isn't a cheap answer.
Thanks for your perspective, John. I'm gonna ask a question of the city manager. I think this list is intended to kind of put things on the council's radar that they might not otherwise be thinking about. And at least my impression is from kind of since this process started, the attention that I've been paying to the city council is that the kind of policing question, broadly stated, is something that's firmly in the middle of their kind of radar right now. And if that's the case, I'm just wondering what adding it on our list would really add to their attention to it, given at least from my observation, they're already kind of paying attention to it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. The police department, I think you all remember, is already partnering with Hennepin County to have social worker embedded with the department so that they are better equipped to handle mental health crisis calls, and especially referrals after the fact in connection with services. We also significantly increased the training of officers over the last several years in the amount of time every year that they spend in training for dealing with residents or customers that are experiencing mental health crisis. So, the comments about you train for one thing, but what you're actually doing in the field is maybe not at all what you train for, right? Is not too far off the mark. And the city and frankly all cities have had to adapt over time to provide that training on the job here. I think that if we were to put this into some sort of a recommendation for consideration longer term, it would probably be something about expanding that program, whether it's in partnership with the county or looking at city resources to supplement it, because it's an increasing component of our calls for service load, and I don't think that it's going to reverse anytime in the near future. So, if you're looking, Mr. Chair, for a way to characterize that conversation, I think it's broadening the response services available through the police department.
Okay, so I guess the question for the group here is, given what we've heard, do we want to add something here? We could use the language that the manager's kind of looking at, or do we want to say something different, or do we want to kind of be silent on that particular topic, having seen that the council is already looking at it? John?
Just thinking about this as a wordsmith, which is dangerous. Marrying what you said, that you're pretty convinced it's already on the radar, I'd be fine with eliminating it, or if we added it, just add the word continue to the city manager's phrase of broadening. So continue broadening might at least show recognition that we know you're on this.
Yeah. So, Jamie, you said broadening
our response services. So, and that means going just beyond traditional law enforcement. So.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
I don't mean to take the committee into too deep of debate here, but I do want to ask the question, and that is that the most cost-efficient way to keep people safe and respond to mental health concerns and other issues that are happening? What we're going through in the country right now, just in general, I think the demand for mental health services is bound to increase as homelessness and other issues are kicking in. So I'm just, from a budget perspective, is that the most cost-efficient and effective way? I just raise it because we're looking at this from a dollar and cents perspective moving forward. And I recognize how much we're asking our police department and those men and women in uniform to do. So I guess I'm asking more of a philosophical question or a policy priority question. If there's a way to actually save money and get as good of an outcome. That's what I'm trying to get at. But and I might be right off topic here, and if that's the case, no consensus.
Steve, hold on just a second. I'm drafting something based on that, just to kind of. So we have put a couple of options up here on the screen. One is continuing to focus on broadening response services, kind of in response to what the manager proposed. Josh, what I'm trying to capture a little bit is what you're talking about, where yours is more kind of looking at our public safety model and saying, what's the best model in the long run to keep Bloomington safe and do that in a cost-efficient way.
Correct.
And
I mean, I'm just looking at what's happening to local, city, county governments all across the country. the budgets are going to continue to be stressed into the long term. Probably while some people become less hopeful and they become more depressed and the pressure on crime and other issues goes up. So we got to get really creative on how we maintain a high quality of life, keep people safe, and help people where they are. That's kind of my challenge to the commission here when I look in my crystal ball from a budgetary perspective.
So how do people feel about this number 2 as the one that we put in there? Maureen?
The printing's kind of small.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Josh, thank you for your comments. I overall agree with you on your thoughts, but where I go on this from the mental health component, I don't necessarily tie that directly into public safety. I think it's a two-prong approach. I think it's public health and potential public safety. So if we're really going to address this, I don't think city-specific can solve this problem on its own. I think this goes well beyond, like you said, this is happening throughout our nation right now. So, what the state is willing to do and what the county is willing to do, and I think it's a partnership of all. So to put the onus on the city of Bloomington and the police department, I would like to see if we're going to have something up there, and I agree wholeheartedly. We've got some major issues with mental health here. I see that as a public health issue as well as a public safety. So if we're going to be talking about helping our public safety and expand and bring in different types of support for public safety, I think you have to mention that this is also a public health crisis that we're dealing with, let alone a public safety crisis.
So, a couple different choices here. We can pick one of these two things. We could have another thing that we decide to do. We could decide that we're going to be silent on it and allow the city council to kind of continue with the things that they have going. Really up to the committee. We don't have to say anything in particular about anything on this list. So there's no pressure for us to make a comment or not.
And I made the mistake of probably starting the conversation that put so much focus on this slide. I would say that in some respects, I certainly agree with everything I've been hearing here and the magnitude of the challenge and the cost and the efficiencies of government and everybody else that touches it, which are sometimes non-government groups. But I'm wondering if this is one of those issues that by adding to the list on sort of budget-focused items actually diminishes the impact of the rest of the list. If we are convinced that we think this is really important, but that the council's on it and that it's a multi-level governmental and non-governmental issue, maybe we're stronger with the overall list by not adding it to this particular slide. But I could surely be comfortable if it's on there. If it was on there, I like the second bullet more than the first, actually, given the conversation.
Yeah, so one thing I think about in this space is that, like former Mayor Winstead was on this, and I can't remember what the committee was, but it was some judges and it was attorneys and elected officials. I don't remember what that group was that was looking for kind of holistic improvements in this particular area.
And Mr. Co-Chair is the Hennepin County Criminal Justice Coordinating Committee.
Yeah, that right there. And this is, we always say at work that if something was simple to solve, we would have solved it, and this falls into the category it's not solved, so therefore it can't be simple to solve. I'm listening to folks talk here. I'm not feeling a consensus coming together on something to put in here. So my tendency at this point is to say that we don't have something listed on here. I'm confident that there are people looking at it, but I think part of the reason why we're not able to succinctly kind of put a consensus around something is it's such a complicated and long-term issue that for us to spend 15 minutes talking about it and putting a sentence on here, it's hard for us to kind of accurately describe the problem. And so with that, what I'd like to propose is that I'm going to take this item off of here, off of this list, and we'll kind of have faith that the council is continuing to work on that and that they've been investing in that, not just, with the events that have happened this year, but for quite some time before that. So Josh, are you okay with that?
Well, I'll disagree, but that's okay. It's totally fine.
Okay, unless people come and tackle me and force me to hit Control Z, I'm going to go like that. Okay, so looking at this list, kind of popping back up a level, other things that folks wanted to put on this list. And again, if we think of things between now and when we're done, we can certainly add items on there. John, did I see your hand over there? Yeah.
Yes, Mr. Chair. The public infrastructure, that is to say Creekside replacement, I don't think that accurately, it doesn't give any focus on moving the majority of the issues at Creekside. It's not just tearing down a building and building a new one, which that you could go down that path real easy. So I think that needs to be reworded.
Okay, I'm open to input on wording here.
Mr. Chair and committee members, maybe I can try to coalesce your conversation here, because we have two different Creekside service levels in the three bundles. There's the reduced service but keep it open, and then there's the close it and provide the services out of the Center for the Arts and other buildings. I think what might be helpful here is to maybe talk about specifically what that longer term conversation is about. Is it about the services and where the services are provided from, or is it about the urgency or the need for replacement of the facility in a certain time frame to address the infrastructure issues?
So would it be maybe, based on that, would it be maybe public infrastructure needed to kind of support the revised service model that the council selects? Does that seem more accurate?
We're getting there.
Well, I think, Mr. Chair,
Yeah.
I think we're also observed that we're at low interest rates, so now is a good time if you're going to borrow money to make strategic investments in infrastructure. This is potentially a good time, and it can put laid off people from Bloomington and this area to work, and some of our small businesses. And so something in there about a longer term funding stream, some sort of strategy here to fix up some of these buildings. And if anybody deserves a safe place to be, it's people who are in need and on some fixed incomes. And
So what do you think about my revised language here? Evaluate sale, or not that, I'm sorry. Public infrastructure needed to support service model selected by council. Low interest rates make this a good time to invest. Then we can go off and think about it a little bit and wordsmith it a little bit more before we're done. Okay? Thank you, John. Other items related to this list? Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to kind of circle back to just a second, I got to switch this because I'm just sharing the PowerPoint stuff. I do want to stop sharing, yeah. Go back to that. Okay, so we had three things on our kind of final list of things to talk about. It was the motor vehicle, it was kind of art support, and it was kind of police impacts of the changes. So I think we'll go to the motor vehicle first. Go back in here. The motor vehicle office is. Where did that one end up going? What's the actual
90.
90? Where did that? I need to look at my other sheet here just a second.
About 2/3 of the way down,
Here we go.
row 14.
Yep.
Row 14.
Right. So that's right here. So if you look for the kind of our need at the 5% level is for about, roughly $1.6 million worth of savings. And of that, $225,000 is coming out of that. If we took this out of here and just kind of let things roll, the next couple things that would move up would be kind of the ash tree contract and the park maintenance position.
Don't mess with that.
Just talking about if we took it out of there and moved it kind of down as a lower priority item. So first I'll see if Jessica has anything more that she wants to say about this particular item. And then I want to check to see what people's opinions are around that. Maureen.
I'm full of opinions, aren't I?
It's all opinions tonight. All opinions.
And this is more of an observation I would like to share with my colleagues here tonight. I had the opportunity to go over to Motor Vehicle Services last week. I had to renew my driver's license, and I applied for a real ID. And I just want to let you all know that was probably one of the most great experiences I have had going and getting my driver's license renewed. And to watch the people, the staff operate, people forgetting certain things, and the patience and the tolerance that they showed the customers, the residents coming in. And as I was sitting there, there were a few of us, and people were commenting, "Oh, isn't this wonderful to have in our city? Isn't this great? Aren't these people, they're just so good to work with." And there was like a family behind that counter. You could tell that these people have worked there for quite some time, and I'm not saying that we have to save the world or save jobs, but I had, after experiencing that, I have a different outlook and perspective on this service that we provide. And I don't think I would have had a mind shift if I wouldn't have gone over there that day. So I'm more inclined to see what we can do. I'll do it, whatever the commission wishes, but I just want to share, if anything, it was a great experience, and Jamie, outstanding group over there.
I guess I have a question for Maureen. Do you think that's experience is because you had to set up an appointment and go? Or is it like if it was a normal day where it's packed full of people, that would have changed your mind?
Thank you, Chuck. No, I think it was because of the appointment, and they were able to process people in a timely manner where you didn't have to wait. So maybe there's that concept in there that can help keep it open, but at a lower cost.
So then my follow-up, I know when we talked about this, the issue is the rate at which we can complete transactions. And have we seen then that having scheduled, times that you can go when you have to set an appointment, has that increased our rate? Because if it hasn't, for me personally, seeing kind of the comments and things that are out there, it's really 50-50. Some people love it, and some people are like, there's one in Edina, there's one in Egan, like within 10-15 minutes of here. If it wasn't here, it wouldn't be a big deal. So if we were going to save it, I would want to make sure that we were processing more transactions, that we would be spending less general tax fund supporting it so that we could keep it going. Otherwise, to me, it doesn't make sense to have somebody at other places within such close proximity to what we have now.
Okay, other comments? Chris.
Mr. Chair and committee members, first of all, Maureen, thank you for the kind comments for our staff. They do work exceptionally hard, and the group we have in that division works really well together right now during these difficult times. And they certainly are not on the list of proposed cuts because they don't do a good job. They're on the list of proposed cuts because when the city got into this business, it was a fee supporting activity, and it's now an activity that the fees do not support. And if we want to have that service in our community, we need to devote property taxes to maintaining it. And that's purely a value judgment. Is that something the committee wants to recommend and ultimately that the council wants to fund? The method that we are operating in right now is prioritizing crowd control and public health standards and social distancing and so on. And that's what's necessary for this time. It does allow us to provide what I think is perceived as a really good level of customer service for those people who are fortunate enough to get an appointment. They come open once a week and we open a block and then they fill up and you have to wait until the next week. It is not a fiscally sustainable model. It is worsening our financial situation, not strengthening our financial situation, the method in which we are working currently by appointment. All of that being said, I do want to make the committee aware that at the staff level, we continue to look at are there any ways we could operate that office differently or more efficiently? And the manager of the office has put forward a couple ideas in the last week or so. They are not fully fleshed out or ready for sort of prime time presentation, but we hope that to be the case in the next week. If they bear out under further analysis, they could conceivably reduce the amount of tax assistance that this office would require. I do not expect that they would return the office to being self-sustaining, though. Not that far, but it might bring that $225,000 number down maybe by as much as half. But like I said, those need some further analysis from our manager over there and myself and our finance staff. So we'll be doing that in the coming days and hope to bring you, if there's an updated cost number to share with you, to bring that to you at your meeting next week. So.
Thank you. So if there are others who feel that they want to move this into another bucket, and I'm proposing if we do that we talk about it in the 3% bucket, now would be the time to speak up because we don't have enough people proposing that to kind of make that move happen right now. Okay, I'm not hearing enough support for changing the rank of this to cause it to move. Okay, so I'm going to check the motor vehicle off of the list of things to talk about, and we're going to move on to the arts-related activities. And that is, where are we at here? It's this one right here. So I'm also in the bucket where I think that the way that this is structured with all of the funding in one item and kind of an up or down sort of thing made it hard for this to represent kind of what I'd like to see here. Personally, what I'd like to see us do is something along the lines of taking this and splitting into 3 chunks and putting 1/3 in each of the 3 categories and have it be more of a stair step. The effect of that, again, is since that's $173, it's $60,000. So what that would end up doing is that would probably end up, depending on where we're at, moving this park maintenance position up into the 5% bucket, and it would move. Let's see here, what's on the line here? Would probably move this Homeland Security Coordinator position into the 3% bucket to do that. So I'll open it up. Somebody else brought up the arts thing, but that's something that I was also thinking about bringing up, and so I wanted to talk about kind of splitting that and making it be a little bit more fine-grained. Others have comments on that, either in support or opposing that.
Well, seeing I brought it up, I would just say I like your idea. It was a little bit troublesome when we had one specific dollar amount. We were talking about either eliminating or reducing. I mean, I think your I think your solution also gives the council some flexibility and maybe a bit of guidance as to what it would do if they went to this level or another one without it being just such a binary choice. I like your idea.
Okay. Other folks on the committee have feedback on that concept.
How would that work? You'd split it?
I think what I would do is I would take it and split it into roughly $60,000 chunks, and there would be a $60,000 chunk at this rank here. There'd be a $60,000 chunk somewhere down in here in the 3%, and another $60,000 chunk in the 0%. And we could. They don't have to be. It doesn't have to be a third. If somebody's got a different proposal, it could be. We could cut it in half and put half in one and half in the other. I just put that forward as a starting point for the conversation.
The
If
higher the levy, the less of the cut.
Right.
correct.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
you would be able to say it's kind of a sliding. Yeah,
Yeah.
I support that.
Okay. Other folks have thoughts on that?
That sounds like a reasonable approach.
Okay. You're going against what you said before, John, which you said you weren't going to support any changes.
It's still all on there. Nothing went away, it just got divvied up different.
Okay. Anyone else have any thoughts on that one?
I will cut it 50-50, right? To have it in 5 and 3.
Do it in 5 and 3?
Yeah.
Okay. How do folks feel about that? I'm seeing a nod from John.
I don't recall how we got to the number 173.
That's everything.
That's just everything.
That's everything, yeah.
Well-
So the whole grant was put on the table as something to be cut as opposed to a percentage cut. So
I think personally, I would still lean towards the thirds, because if we look at what the comments have said, regardless of where we at, people still want to support that, and so realistically, if we did it in half, if we were thinking kind of forward thinking, seeing what the council might do, there's a realistic chance that it would all get cut anyways. So then we wouldn't be able to support what the community has told us that's important to them. And so by having it in thirds, at least we would have a realistic chance, whether it's very small, $60,000, won't be able to do a significant amount, but it'd still be something to continue to keep that flame alive as we work through this time. So I'd be more in favor of the third split so that we could continue to support this in the fullest level we can.
okay, so I think there's now enough people behind the 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 that we're going to stick with that. Here's what I'd like to propose is that we keep 1/3 here in this 280 position. That we put 1/3, I'll say, kind of in the middle of the 3%, which would be roughly kind of the 350 level. And then we would put 1/3 down here in the middle of the 0%, which would be something at like the 640 level. People okay with that? Okay. So I'll make a change. I don't want to do this editing in the meeting because it just becomes a nightmare. So I just am making notes as we go along. So then the last, so unless there's any further input on that one, I'm going to say that we have enough of a consensus around that we're going to go with that change. Okay. So then finally, we had a comment about kind of the allocation on police. And if you look here, this is the summary that does a crosstab by reduction scenario. And just as a review, the police department in the 5% levy received no cut. There's a small reduction in the 3% levy and a larger one in the 0%. And for reference purposes, if you look here, the police department's budget is, the original budget that we're starting from is a little bit over $28 million. So in the 3% scenario, we have a $100,000 cut on a $28 million budget, which I would, at least at work, I would call that in the noise and say it's not really a cut because that doesn't represent a super large part of the budget. The 0% one, represents that's a noticeable change in the budget in terms of service level that people are doing, and that's I want to make it clear when I'm talking about this that if people are impacted by the $101,000 cut, we're not trying to minimize that, but in terms of I think we're trying to characterize it in terms of service level here. So I'll open it up to comments on kind of how this ended up laying out that way. Maureen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So one of the things I'm going to be real interested in is the citizen survey when we see those results, because I know public safety does play a very heavy weight in this survey and the comments that our citizens rank. So I'm real interested to see how that lands, because if the residents really truly value our police and fire, I think we really need to adhere to what our residents are speaking on and what they value most. So I know at some point, there has to be some kind of cuts. I just don't see it being complete zero, but I'd like to minimize it. And even if it's noise, Mr. Chair, to me, it's a cut. If I see money being taken out, it's a cut. So I would like to kind of not postpone, but kind of put into the parking lot the police budget and fire budget until we can see more information. And I just have to be just frank and honest on this whole process. When I have gone through, all the different scenarios, the public comments, I honestly believe where we are at is between a 3% and a 5%. I just don't see us coming forth with anything below 3% or even close to a zero. We're going to have to pay for something, and I just don't know. I just don't think we're going to be at that zero by the time we get through the rest of the exercise. So part of me says, let's just focus on the 3 and 5% and see where that takes us.
Other comments? Josh?
Well, I mean, I think the council has to make a decision if they want to be perceived as raising taxes or not. And that will have to ultimately be their political judgment. And we've got to lay out for them some options if they decide to go zero tax increase. That's going to be the perception. And they have to recognize then what the trade-offs are. Because you can't, it's fantasy to say that don't raise my taxes and don't cut things in this environment. That's fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've got to have a very honest debate and tee up really hard choices for the public. So I would argue to make sure we keep it in there. And again, not to beat a dead horse here, but if we hold public safety harmless this year, and we're back here again in a year and it's worse, it's going to be that much more difficult if we're not thinking creatively about the long term. And that goes back to my earlier argument about what's down the road in year 2, 3, and 4 if this economy doesn't turn around. In a city that's heavily reliant on hospitals or hotels. So that's just kind of how I'm seeing it.
Other comments? Saw.
And I would echo what Josh just said as well. I think part of the ask that we were given was to make these hard decisions and to, what Josh just said, to hold certain departments to a different standard than others would be doing a disservice to the city. So I'd like to have that robust conversation now while we have the chance. Whether if it gets better, then it gets better. If it doesn't, then we've started that so that it makes the future discussions easier. So I would like to, continue those robust conversations about police and fire, so that we really vet this out and do the city the service that we have been tasked to do.
Okay, thank you. Other comments? Okay, so those were the kind of items that we were going to go back and review. Are there any other things based on where we're at that people want to bring up? So I think what we're, if it turns out that there aren't, what we're likely to do is to adjourn. We'll update this list so you see the final set of stuff. We'll get the remaining items from that the staff said that they were going to be providing that would come out. We would meet next week to have a final look and see if we're at a point where we think that the three options that we put together are something that we want to transmit to the council. And then if that turns out to be the case, then send those along. So I'll kind of call at this point for anything that anybody wants to bring up at this point. Because what I don't want to do is I don't want to have too much new come up next week that requires more information, because next week it's hard for us to kind of turn that crank again. John?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, in that spirit, one thought, I really liked the slide that you presented that you used at the public input sessions that reflected the property tax impact on at 0, 3, and 5.
Oh, this picture here.
Yes.
That
one.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if, building off of some of the sentiment that Josh just expressed, I'm wondering if now that we know the maximum levy of the county and the maximum levy of the school district and the special districts, I'm wondering if that could just be expanded to include the other property tax leviers, if you will, so that in the far right column, you'd actually see what a 5, 3, and 0% city levy increase would mean for the overall property tax bill for that median value home. At 3%, it goes down.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it might be useful for the public conversation and understanding that be demonstrated. And it might help the council members too to, maybe have that math done ahead of time for them. So maybe for next week, if we just see what that looks like, I would appreciate it.
I think, is that, do we have enough information that we could do an approximation of that? I'm seeing nodding from the staff.
We do, Mr. Chair and committee members, and I guess I just look to you, Mr. Chair, say we can have our assessing team update that and send it to you, and you can format the slide the way you want, or you can have us do it, and we can put a slide together.
No, if you can send that to me. The other thing I'm going to suggest as part of that, since we're kind of pivoting to the kind of dollar impact concept, is that we would, rather than calling them 5%, 3%, and 0%, we would call them like A, B, and C, so that they're not anchored to a particular percentage, and that we would have the information presented alongside that would show that both the city level property tax impact and the other property tax impact, so that that it's really, really strongly grounded in the kind of personal, kind of monthly tax impact information that we'd have now that we have that. Are people okay with pivoting in that direction? Okay. Okay, so
So, Mr. Chair,
yeah, go ahead.
before we wrap up here, walk us through what this looks like when it gets presented to the council. Is that something that you want all of us there to kind of show support, or what's your thinking there?
So I think there's a couple. So Neil and I went in person as you can be at the council, which was the mayor and Jamie sitting up there, and then everybody else watching on TV, and Neil and I kind of standing 6 feet apart at the podium. I don't know that it's necessary for folks to come to the meeting, but I think that it would be okay if folks came and were in the call and were able to kind of answer questions, and just to kind of show the support of the committee. I just don't think we can do it physically in the room with the way the council meeting runs in the chambers. The other thing that I did want to bring up, and Josh, I'm glad you brought this up, is that both Neil and I have personal opinions about what the right choice is, but when we represent it to the council, we don't represent one of them as being preferred from the committee, because we've decided that, and we haven't been asked to do a preference. But if people have a particular scenario that they think is the right scenario for the council to do, I think committee members should send individual messages to the council saying, I'm on the committee, and I support the set of scenarios that the committee has put forward. If it was my decision, I would be picking this one, and here's why. I think the council would appreciate that particular kind of input. It's not required, but if you want a particular scenario represented as the one that that you would favor for the council to do, I think people can put their individual opinions forth on that, and I would encourage folks to do that in the form of an email to the council secretary. And we would, basically you'd do that after, in the time period between the meeting next week and when we go to the council meeting. So I think what we'll want to do is make sure that the committee members know which council meeting and roughly where it is in the agenda and get instructions on how to join the call so that they can participate. Okay? Okay. So I think I'm not hearing anybody come forward. We're kind of having process conversation at this point and not hearing anybody coming forward with anything further on areas that they wanted to talk about. So I'm going to declare that closed for tonight. So what's going to happen next week is you'll get a revised version of the spreadsheet that has the change related to the arts grants that we talked about tonight, represented in that. You'll also have the information from the staff on the community survey and kind of the value sorts of things there. And ideally what will happen next week is we'll come back and folks will have had a week to sleep on it, and we'll have a conversation and say, okay, these are the three options that we're going to go forward with. And that will be the agenda for next week. So
One last question.
Go ahead, Josh.
Is it appropriate, Jamie, for this committee to put out a kind of a statement to the Sun Current that lays out, that we've completed this work and here's what we're submitting to the city council so that it helps continue to generate public interest and debate?
I think that's a good idea, is to think about the public messaging around this. Let's, Kari and I will go back and chat with our communications team, and then we'll discuss with our co-chairs in our weekly check-in with them, and see what we can put together. I think that if there is consensus around a report, as it were, coming out of the committee, not just the three different options, but some statement regarding the recommendations from the committee, that can certainly be utilized in the body of a press release or letter to the editor or something along those lines. So I think there's value in doing that.
Okay, so we'll bring something back next week.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
is there a consensus on this committee that we would come to the council with a strong recommendation? I mean, we can present them with three different things, but if I were on the council, I'd be saying, well, which one do they want us to do? I would prefer, from my personal standpoint, to now say, here's what we've done, here's what we think we recommend, and give them something to chew on. Right now, we're just giving them a whole smorgasbord.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll second that. And kind of a decision-making process I've been involved in the past. It's called a course of action brief, in which you lay out, these are your three options, here's some pros and cons. I think excellent work's been done here. And then based upon our perspective, here's our recommendation.
Yeah.
And then, the decision makers take that and they can reject it or they can modify it, but at least it goes forward. So I'd second that.
Yeah, so my limiting it to the three choices and not not recommending one particular thing, it hasn't been because I don't think people have opinions, because I think this group has a good set of opinions and that it's worthwhile. It's that we weren't asked to provide a choice. We were asked to propose three scenarios. And so I've tried to stick fairly closely to what we've been asked to do with respect to the council. And as I think it was Josh that talked about earlier, there's a political calculus to this at the council level that we don't have to worry about here in the committee. And so that's why I'm wary about it. if it was the consensus of the group that we ought to come and stand behind one particular choice, I'd support the group's feeling on that. But I've tried to be fairly kind of tried to follow what the council has asked us to do fairly strongly as part of the process. And they specifically didn't ask us to make to choose one of them as a favorite child. So,
Mr. Chairman,
yeah.
I had the impression that the council gave us an order that was recommended to them. I don't think that they said don't make a recommendation. I think that in the presentation we said we'll give you 3 choices, and they say okay. I don't see how they would object to it at all. In fact, again, if I were on the council, I'd want give me a strong opinion, and I can disagree with you, but give me something.
Mr. Chair.
And John.
2 words come to mind: slippery slope. We're starting to get into the political side of things. I think our basic charge was to develop 3 scenarios. I think that's going far enough. I just don't like stepping into that political arena. You can say we're not, I say we are, when we start saying this particular one. I think the choice of 3 is going far enough.
Other comments?
Mr. Chair.
Maureen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Neil, I agree with you philosophically. However, I look around this room. I don't know if we can all get strongly behind one recommendation. We have all different thoughts and where we think we should be. And just to come up with, I agree with 3 scenarios, and then for all of us to get behind one, I just realistically, I don't see that happening. I mean, I think it'd be great, but I just, because of human nature and differences, I just don't think, because we've agreed to do a consensus here, and you're going to have to get consensus to recommend, one of the 3, and I just don't know if we're going to be able to get to that consensus. I think Steve's recommendation of each of us contacting the city council members on what we prefer, what our preference is, I think is another way to go about it. But I just don't know if we're going to be able to come to a consensus on one recommendation.
Mm-hmm. And so I went and just kind of dug up the charter just to see what actually was written down, and it was pretty clear that we were going to produce scenarios, and it's silent on kind of recommending. So I think that's why I've been staying away from the recommending. And I think the other thing is I think I think it actually makes it in some respects easier for the council to have a conversation incorporating the information that they have with what we provide if we don't have a committee recommendation, we just have 3 options, because it puts them in a position where they have to kind of incorporate all that information together and make a decision around it. So, other comments or observations here? So we don't have to decide on this until next week, so we can give that a little bit of thought. But at least, I heard some support for having a specific recommendation, but not strong enough where I'd say that there's a consensus around it right now. And certainly, will be interesting if we decide that we're going to do it, how we actually get to a consensus on what number we pick, which I think, could be a pretty substantial conversation by itself. So. Okay, anything else regarding kind of process and kind of where we're headed for next week? Anything else from the staff for tonight's meeting? Okay, unless there is anything else, the meeting stands adjourned.